As a drum fan, this is Matt Mees. I am honored to be interviewing you.
Thanks,
Thank you
man.
for doing this, to getting your story, and it's like your name keeps coming up.
Glad to be here.
All over. You play with a lot of people, and it's like, I've been doing my homework, so it's like,
yeah,
always varied. It's always varied, so it's not just one style. So I appreciate that. So how you doing now, Matt?
Well, now that COVID's starting to end, the work's coming back on. I've got 3 or 4 new projects with dates that are starting to sprinkle on the summer calendar as far as live work. Some of the original bands that I was in are going to start getting back together and, rehearsing again, now that we can all 4 get in the room safely and, breathe each other's air. Because the one thing I love about music is that I live alone now. But it makes up a great deal of my social life.
Oh yeah.
I've always been in tune with the brain of musicians. For some reason, I just so a great deal of my friends, even people I don't play with in bands currently, that's my social life. And when that all stopped, that was kind of tough, for me living alone. It was me and the cat for like a year.
Yeah.
And so now it just feels great. I just feel, I can see the sunshine and, so life is good.
At the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, life is good. Yeah.
Yes. So I hear you're back to playing with Merv.
Yeah, Merv and I have a new project. My cat's back. Merv and I have a new project called Mervana, and just kind of focusing on 90s stuff. And Merv's got the itch to play live again in a band, and so we're just doing something.
I hope to be jamming with you. I'm going to be in Columbus.
Oh, so cool.
So I hope to sit in with you.
Oh, okay.
They said something about that when it was still the point, and then you change focus, and so anyway.
Yeah.
So how does all this? Okay, I'm going back. Let's go back to Little Matt back in the day. So what was your earliest musical memories?
As far as me playing, or just like what affected me before,
Yeah, how did this all start, your musical life?
Well, okay, the musical life started, I lived in a family where mom having the opera and more classical music background, you would walk in the house and she taught piano. So I would come home from school every day and there'd be a kid sitting at the piano working on his scales, and, mom would be teaching piano or voice. And so I grew up in that environment, and my dad was a jazz fan. Grew up in the swing era. He was a World War II guy. And so that
was my dad.
Yeah. So the swing music was like his youth. And like, if you came in and Benny Goodman was on the turntable, then dad had access to the turntable that day. Yep. Gene Krupa grew up with a lot of that. And then later in life, he turned into more of an Oscar Peterson, Nat King Cole Trio kind of guy. But anyway, so that was my first introduction. And then I had an older brother and an older sister who were exactly 10 years older than me. And so I grew up listening to their record collection. So I got classical music and show tunes from mom. I got jazz from dad. And then my older brothers and sisters had all the pop and fusion and stuff that was happening in the early 70s.
Okay.
Everything from James Brown to Frank Zappa. And to this day, my taste buds range from
James Brown to Frank Zappa.
Yeah, everything in between. I love I'm fascinated by crafting the ultimate pop songs and the ones that just last forever. And when I say pop, I mean it in the best sense of the word.
I know. I understand exactly what you mean.
Because I think there's a certain art to writing a song like Yesterday or Let It Be, something that just kind of, lasts the ages. I really do. That melody that everybody hums when they're driving to work or you're walking through the grocery store. I use the term earworm.
Yeah.
Once you just drill yourself in there, you can't get rid of it. And there are guys who just seem to be really good at writing earworms.
Because I'm doing my research. I was Scott Gorsuch. Is that how you?
Yeah, Scott. He's amazing.
Okay, so a lot of the people who would talk about him, they compare him somewhere between XTC, Steely Dan, Jellyfish. These are all yours.
And the backup vocals, there's a little Queen influence in there.
But there's a little weirdness that makes him completely original too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's like that is not your typical just your straight of the head meat and potatoes rock.
Not at all. Not
Yeah.
at all. With Scott, you need to kind of have a finger in many pies, because he's going to ask you to play everything from a bossa nova to, a straight down the middle bottom beat on various songs. So you kind of have to be able to go in all those different directions with him. And then if you're in the band with him, you got to be able to sing. When you play live with Scott, you're trying to cover as much of that stuff as you can. And it's just, his stuff's so hard.
How hard are the rehearsals?
The rehearsal, we never have enough rehearsals because Phil and Scott and I are both, pushing 60 and have, those two guys have kids that are still growing up and wives and mortgages and blah, blah, blah. So
yeah.
I feel like I never, and I've told Scott this face to face, I feel like I never really have a chance to learn his material. I'm always just holding on for dear life, just trying to get through the arrangement without dropping the ball.
Yeah.
And if you're, you being a player, that once you've played a song enough times in a short period of time, you really now you can actually play it.
Put your personality into it.
Yeah, you can really, you're not so worried about when the turns happen. It's like, how am I going to take the turn?
Yeah.
Because I know it's coming up. And drummers have an interesting thing in arrangements where you have to solve what I call musical problems. Hey man, I need a fill to get us from the bridge to the chorus, or I need to, and a lot of times the drummer kind of does a brap boo shaga boo ba and gets you to the next part. So that's just part of the thing that the drummers bring in. And with a guy like Scott, it's always like, oh my God, how do I get from this thing to this thing? How do I solve this musical problem?
Yeah. But that is that's mine.
It's a thing that keeps me interested in it.
Yeah. It's
you know what I mean? It's the thing that keeps me interested in the whole process, because the writing process and the recording and the production of your own material to me is my first love, and will always be my first love. Starting with some of my first bands, we started writing songs, and that's the part of it that I'm really attracted to. I mean, I do cover bands.
Let's go back to your first year. Okay, when did you? How old were you when you first took up the drums?
Oh, I was 9 when I first picked up the drums. I had been taking piano from the age of 3 or 4. My mom sent me to a lady who taught piano down the street because she thought it'd be weird for her to teach me herself, and it would have been.
Yeah.
And that lasted a couple years, but then it just wasn't my bag. I loved what I learned from piano, and it came in handy later in college to be able to plunk out chords and learn theory and stuff. But, I wanted my own thing. And so I started doing the drums about the same time. I started doing the drums about age 9, and then played brass all through school as well, starting in 4th or 5th grade, whenever they started where I went to school. And, so yeah, I played a bunch of different instruments, but drums was the thing that I always looked forward to the most. That was definitely my thing.
Do you still play any of the horns or the brass?
No, I haven't played the brass since I left college. Okay. I was good at it. Sat first chair in the OSU Symphony playing euphonium, and so it was something that I could have pursued had I been into classical music as a career move, after college. Yeah. But I did it in order to fulfill credits, because you had to have a secondary instrument as a music major, and I enjoyed it. I really do. I mean, if I had the time to go still play brass, I probably would. Have to find my embouchure again. It's been 20 or 30 years. But anyway, getting back to the original question. So starting about age 9, the drums, and it was all mine because my mom didn't play, and I think that was part of it, but mostly it's because I just love it. As soon as I got behind the kit, I think, like for a lot of players, you try different stuff, and then, man, you realize, this is kind of where I should have been all along.
Yeah, this is one of the things I do is I teach. I have a music program where I teach really young kids.
Okay.
And it's just musical discovery. It's like, we don't have to make any devotion to any one instrument. You want to try some piano? We try some piano. You
absolutely
and percussion.
Yeah,
all rhythm centered. My thing is rhythm centered, but it's all we strum guitars. I even have like a 3-string power chord guitar where all they do is
block E all the way up the neck.
It's
right.
Drop D. It's D-A-D. It's dad tuning.
You have one in drop D.
They're 5 years old. They're playing Soundgarden.
Right, with one finger across the strings. Right. Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, so just that might be discovery.
The hook. That might be the hook that makes them.
Yeah.
I taught drums for 10 or 15 years here at the house. I've recently thrown in the towel on that, but I love that look on a kid's face. You know, not every student was going to grow up and be a professional drummer, but every now and then you'd find that kid that you either knew had the gift, or even the ones who don't have the natural ability, when they finally wrestle something to the ground. There's a look on their face that I just love to this day. And I know exactly how they feel, because there'll be times when I'm working on a song for a band, you know, a James Brown groove that I've never learned, or something a little more technical, and I'll finally wrestle that pup to the ground. And even to this day, I'm like, yeah, all right. You know, when you've been working on something and you finally tag it, you know, at age 60, I feel like I'm 18 again.
Well, yeah. But the other thing is, whether they're a pro or not, you know, you're changing their lives.
Yeah.
You're changing them. Their stuff is changing, and it goes into,
when I always try to be
change is global. It doesn't just affect your drumming. It affects everything.
Yeah. And with me, because it was never the large portion of my income, I just did it as like a little bit of side money, I guess you'd say. I really wanted to be the teacher who gave a crap. And was a good influence on you personally as well as musically. Yeah. One of the things that has worked really well for me in my favor is, one of the things my old man pounded into me when I was a kid was the whole old school work ethic. You know, show up on time, make sure your drums are in good condition, you know, have the ability to get to the gig. Don't be calling people at the last minute for a ride. You know, don't wait till the last minute. Show up on time, show up sober, show up in a good mood. Yeah. You know, show up with the right
good hang.
If it's a wedding gig, don't show up looking like a hobo. You know, if you're in a grunge band, you're supposed to look like a hobo. But in a wedding band, you know, you kind of got to understand what the gigs are about. If you're going to actually make a living at it. Yeah. And the day I quit my day job 30 some odd years ago, when I finally threw in the towel on a full-time paycheck, I made the promise to myself that if I wasn't working and it paid, I was going to do the gig. None of this like artsy fartsy, oh, I don't know, that's beneath me, I don't play reggae, or whatever your thing is. Yeah. Bull hockey. You know, just go play the gig, learn how to do it. If you know, my first pay the rent gig was a country band I was in when I was 18 years old, and I played 5 nights a week, 5 sets a night, you know, 45-minute sets, 45-minute sets a night, Tuesday through Saturday, for weeks at a time. And when you start treating it as a job and everything that entails, from a very young age, I needed to show up on time because I needed to pay rent. Yeah. You know, I needed to stay
in your mom's basement forever.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, and I moved out of my folks' house when I was 17. Yeah. So I mean, I started young, paying rent. You know. Yeah. So, just all of that. I think all of that comes into play. You know, especially when you start getting into the recording business, where, you know, even you know, a questionable studio is going to be $30-40 an hour with an engineer. You know, you start lumping up that kind of money. There's a lot at stake. Like if you're working for a song, I do a lot of like little projects for singer-songwriters because they know I'll show up with a good attitude, and I'll listen to the songs a few times and try to get some ideas quickly put together that they can use. Like the Gorsuch record, the last one, the Park Boulevard Park, that just came out last year.
Which is wonderful, by the way.
What's that?
It's wonderful, by the way.
Oh, Scott. I love Scott.
That is I'm learning all this new music I never heard of before. He's a treasure.
He is a treasure. And but you know, once again, the budget was so tight. So Scott and I, we did all the drum tracks for the whole record in a day. One day. I went in there, and I remember the post popped up on my Facebook a few months ago, the Facebook reminder post, because when I got home that night after about 15 hours straight, I posted, "Hey, Ringo, you ain't got nothing on me. I did the whole record in one day too." You know, like the Beatles did their first record in one day. And I got to tell you, man, it was, you know, because we didn't use computers, we went right to tape. So you had to get the whole track right. Yeah. No digital editing, no computer.
Wow, that's incredible now.
And that was the only record we've ever done without a click track. Okay. So when he did all the overdubs on that record and stuff, he had to just like listen to the song and jump in, and you know.
So he drums too?
He drummed on 2 of the tracks, and one of them is probably the quirkiest drum track on the record, because Scott's a good drummer too. And he actually was very sheepish about it. He's like, "Hey man, do you mind if I play 2 tracks?" I'm like, "Dude, it's your record, man." It's like, you know, he played drums on Taffy Man and Peace. And if you listen to Taffy Man, the drum part's joyous. It's so cool.
Yeah.
And so I literally just, he just sat behind my kit while we had him mic'd up in the studio, and just, without even, like, he just knew the song, so he didn't play to anything. He didn't like have a track to play to. He just sat there and played the parts.
Yeah.
And if you listen to Taffy Man especially, it's like, that's a pretty complicated little tune. And he tagged it, of course. The drumming is impeccable, and but he had turned it into his own little project, and he really wanted to do it, and it's great, and it's astounding. It's probably the best drum track on the record, to be honest with you. I mean, whatever, I don't look at it that way, but I mean, when I listen to that track, I'm like, that's just awesome.
Yeah.
And,
You're good. You're proud of that. You're proud of him.
Oh yeah, he's so good. And well, if you listen to the first record, he played everything on that record. His first record had a song called Popular, that was kind of a little hit around here. We opened for Michelle Branch and Dada and a bunch of people when that record came out. And I hadn't been on the record, so I had to walk in and learn all those songs. And man, some of the drumming on that
Which albums are you on?
I'm on he's got 4 records out. I did 2, 3, and 4. The first record is called Purple. That's all Scott. I'm on, what's the second one called? Third one's Obliviography. The fourth one is Park Boulevard Park, and I'm on the second record too, which is, I probably have a copy around here somewhere. What is that called? Isn't that terrible? Anyway, I'm sure you can find it on his SoundCloud page. Anyway, I played on records 2, 3, and 4, and Scott played on 2 tracks on the latest record. I've actually said this to him many times. I have no idea why he uses me in the recording process.
Just be grateful, right?
He really doesn't need me around. He's so good.
Overcast.
Oh yeah, that was the second record. I'm on that record as well. And the first 2 records, Scott did the drums at his apartment. Overcast, we did most of the drums in Phil Maneri's basement. And then records 3 and 4, we actually used a real studio for the drums. We went into Music Hole, and Scott works at Music Hole now, so we can kind of find hours in the middle of the night when there's nobody there and save a few bucks. And so that's kind of the home.
So who were your earliest mentors on drums?
A couple local guys. As far as local guys, there was a guy named Pete Retzloff, who's now got a really successful drum school called The Collective in New York City. Tom Harriman, who is now a songwriter living out on the West Coast. His daughter is the lead in Hamilton right now, and the female lead in the production of Hamilton. But Tom is a great writer also, but a great drummer. And he grew up on my street. He had great bands, and he lived 3 houses down. So those are local guys, Tom Harriman and Pete Retzloff. But are you asking me like mentors on records?
Or no, just like, did you have any drum teachers or anything like that?
Oh yeah, not really. I was self-taught until college, and I studied with a fella here in town named Jim Curlis at OSU when I was a student there. So I took a couple quarters of lessons with Jim. I left OSU in my junior year. I never graduated. And just went on the road. I mean, boom, I left. I quickly realized, because I was gigging the whole time, and I was a performance major. So I very quickly realized that in order to do what I wanted to do musically, I didn't need the degree. I needed to show up and be able to play the material. And to this day, that's the thing you have to do. I mean, most auditions, they don't usually ask you about your music degree, unless you're trying to get things or a ballet or a pit orchestra production company or what have you. That's a different.
Teach at community college, unless you're trying to teach at community college. That's the only time it really.
Yeah, like if I was trying to get a job like that, then I would need the sheepskin. But I that was never in my. My mom had an education degree, and she was always, when I was in college, she's like, you really ought to get the education degree. And I just never wanted to be a teacher enough to You know, I taught privately, you know, on my own terms later in life, but it wasn't part of my planning structure when I was 18, 19, 20.
Yeah.
And it really isn't now. I've since moved on and I don't miss it too much. I miss some of the kids I met, obviously, along the way. But yeah, so that the meant as getting back, I keep going on these roundabout excursions when I yak.
You're good.
But as far as
your story,
as far as mentors go, there's a mentor when I first came on the scene, and you'll see him all over local Facebook pages, a guy named Jimmy Casto. He goes on Facebook by James Brooke Casto. He played with Ronald Cole and the Trillionaires, and he's played in a bunch of really good bands over the years. He's just a local phenom. He's just one of the most soulful craft. I use the term crafty when I describe Jimmy because he's got great chops. But I remember as a kid, I was in a band called Amy and the Boys playing at Mr. Brown's, which was one of the spots to play on High Street back in the 70s and early part of the 80s. And it was probably 1981. And so the band I had started with a buddy from high school called Amy and the Boys had gotten a little bit of, you know, we'd gotten some momentum. So we're opening for Ronald at Mr. Brown's. And I remember sitting backstage watching Jimmy Casto play the craftiest, coolest, smartest drum parts to these wonderfully songs that Ronald Cole's band did. And he instantly became one of my mentors. And in fact, he was one of the first guys that showed me that it was okay to be a musical omnivore. Because when you go see Jimmy play on Tuesday, he's playing with a hardcore bebop band. Then he had a really good blues band in town for years called Men of Leisure, R&B blues. But he was a big student of old school R&B and funk, and he just had this capacity to soak it in and funnel it into his own thing. You know,
bring it all in. It's all about the mix. I've said this 100 times in the last month or so that all my favorite musicians take from everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They're open. And it's not just, okay, so one of my heroes was the guy that been named Chuck Rainey. He was the bass player, among others. What people know most about him is Steely Dan. He played on a lot of their stuff.
Okay, right.
One of the things he said, that the best thing you can do as a musician is to listen and to absorb and to learn the language of many different musical styles and many different things. And he said that you're not going to play all these things, but it's going to affect you. Now, what I think, as a bass player, as a guitar player, as a drummer, you're a testament that you've done a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I
you know what I mean? It's like Chuck says, you're not going to play all those styles, and for real. But he also lived in New York. If you want to get a reggae bass player, you pull a reggae bass player who came up from Jamaica.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so, but in small town USA, we can play everything. Absolutely. Yeah, we are exposed to all that. So and then it's the mixtures of all that stuff too. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And the joy of the internet is now the nerdcore kids that can sit in the room for hours at a time. And I mean, nerdcore in a good way. And they can just sit there and, like, you know, I have friends of mine ask me, like, oh, what about today's drummer? I'm like, man, today's drummers could take Buddy Rich to school. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm not taking anything away from Buddy or John Bonham but the kids today have those giant shoulders to build on now. Yeah. And they have access to stuff I wish I had when I was 9, 10, 11, like when that fire burns red hot. When you're first learning how to play, if I had been able to flip on YouTube and watch Clyde Stubblefield show me what he played on Cold Sweat for James Brown, it would have saved me 75 hours of sitting with the record player next to the drum kit, trying to figure out the groove. Yeah, because some of that stuff, it was just the way it was recorded. Like, they would hang a drum over the kit. So trying to hear the kick drum pattern on some of those old James Brown records, good luck. You know, you might get close to it. Especially on the cheap record player I had when I was a kid. So there were some songs that I had learned where I had gotten some inflection points a little wrong. And so fast forward 30 years and I'm sitting on YouTube and Clyde Stubblefield shows you. And I can remember now, there's been 10 or 20 moments where I'm like, that's the thing I never figured out. You know, like,
so how does he get that 16th note?
Yeah, it's like, oh, he does the tap with the right hand. Like, oh, I was trying to do it with this, just some little thing. Like, oh, he takes the hand off the hi-hat. That's why that stroke sounds like that. There's just some of it's just the sticking pattern. Like what you're playing is producing the same sound, the drum, same pattern to the ear. But the sticking pattern can change the inflection of how people really feel what you're doing. And so suddenly you're like, oh, he played two hands on the hi-hat. There was a song, I can't remember what it was, but for the longest time, I worked my right hand to play the pattern because that's what I thought he was doing. I saw the guy play it live, and I'm like, oh, he's using two hands. No wonder it, just little things.
Yeah.
And so I wish I had that now.
How important are rudiments to you in your growth?
Oh, very important. They're the. I'm going to just take this guy up because he's just going to drive me crazy if I don't talk to him. Okay, there you go, Nibbler. You feel better? Rudiments are incredibly important to me. They. I mean, I'm not a rudiment master, but sometimes it's the best way to get from point A to point B. So, I think that rudiments. I think drum chops is the general term I use now. It's like your vocabulary if you're a writer. The more of it you have, the more exacting you can be in the way you describe something to somebody. So I think that if you look at it that way, that's the way I view chops. If you always want to be a simplistic writer and speak in single and two syllable words, then you might not need the chops if that's your goal. But I think you're just closing off options.
Yes.
That you might want to explore later if you don't
have
colors
that you can use. And
yeah, it sounds kind of artsy fartsy when you talk that way, but if you're a player, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like
nuances.
Yeah, you get presented with, once again, one of those little musical problems that you have to solve as a drummer, and you can either do it and sound like a caveman, or maybe you're in a song that might require a little finesse. If you're playing in a straight up, and I'm not simplifying anything for anybody, but it really it just kind of blocks you off from certain avenues that you might really want to explore at some point.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Now back in the day, did you learn that on your own? Like the rudiments and all?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that. The thing went dead for just a second. Go ahead.
Back in the day, did you learn that all on your own?
I bought some rudiment books. I had that drummer friend, Tommy Harriman, who lived down the street. I took about 2 lessons from him. I already knew how to read music from school band. So all I needed was the notation that was specific to drums.
Yes.
The way they mark 5-stroke and 7-stroke rolls with a little crosshatch and stuff like that. So I needed to learn that stuff. But then after that, I could do it all on my own. Yeah. I was able to read the stuff. And then later on in life, at the beginning of the CD era, a lot of the books that you would buy would come with a CD.
Yeah.
And so you could hear the way the guy was interpreting them, which I found very helpful. So even to this day, I'm primarily self-taught. Because I was only in college for a couple of years, and it just it wasn't that I didn't like academic. What's that?
And you studied the horn.
Well, that was part of it. I was a jazz percussion performance major.
Okay.
So I was having to play, drum kit, but I was also having to learn how to improv on the xylophone.
Yeah.
Which I had no interest in spending hours and hours and hours. And in the School of Music at the time, you had to take 7 courses every quarter, because there were a lot of 2 and 3 credit hour courses, which meant you had to prep for 7 separate finals. And if you were a really crappy xylophone player like me, that absorbed all the time you wanted to spend on the stuff you were actually interested. You know what I mean? Because you had to pass the final on xylophone. Yeah. It's like, I don't give a crap about the xylophone. I have no interest in that. I'm only doing it because I have to.
Yeah.
And so once again, it was distracting from the mission.
Real stuff. Yep.
How to play the drums, Yeah. So as soon as I realized that the mission for me to learn how to play the drums didn't involve me being in the School of Music, and I was getting calls to do gigs that paid pretty well, at that point, it's like, well, I think I'm gonna bail on the School of Music. And
what year are we talking?
I left after the second quarter of my junior year.
And this
So,
is a,
yeah, I'd have to go back and do 4 or 5 quarters, but I have no, I do not regret that decision in any way.
so who is Drums and Wires?
Phil Maneri, who plays on the Gorsuch records with me, and a fella named Lance Ellison here in town, who is probably the most technically resplendent guitar player I have ever played in a band with. He's toured with, there's a bass player here in town who played with Miles named Foley. He plays in Foley's band. Okay, well, Lance is Foley's guitar player, so he's just absolutely badass. But he's one of those kids. I remember back in the day, we were both partying a little bit, and we were driving around in his brother's Volkswagen Bug, and Eruption by Van Halen came on the record, and Lance looked at me and he goes, "I know exactly what that guy's doing." And we went home to his house and he played it. He literally sat down and just played it almost note for note. And he's got the biggest set of ears of any musician. He's right up there with Gorsuch as far as the ability of his ears to, it's just an astounding. What's that?
To make musical decisions.
He's just so quick and learning. Like as soon as he hears it, he knows it. A buddy of mine tells this story. There's a band here in town called Snowblind. One of the guys in the band owns Sonic Lounge, Joe Veers, and apparently Joe was able to make. He plays bass in this band. They were playing it, and he wasn't able. Like, well, Lance can learn stuff pretty quick. So he literally learned the material listening to it in the van on the way to a pretty big show in Cleveland. And they told me later he played it perfect. He played it perfectly. And it was bass. It's not even his first instrument. Yeah. I mean, Lance is one of those guys who can play anything with strings on it. But his memory, like his ability to just take that like photographic memory for your ears, I think would be the best term. And he just, when they told me that story, the guy, me knowing Lance, because I met Lance in 7th grade, me knowing Lance as well as I did, I just kind of was like, well, of course he did. Yeah. Because he's that good. But anyway, so Drums and Wires was this band, Phil Maneri and Lance and I owned a great big house out in Old Town East on the east side of Columbus. And we had a great rehearsal room on the first floor. And we got together every Sunday. We called it the Flintstones when we got started. We wrote all these songs. I can send you some links. Very technically, we were all listening to a lot of King Crimson and Zappa and it's not spelled like you would spell Drums and Wires. It's Drums and as one word with a Z, and then Wires. And we named it we stole the name and respelled it off of an old XTC record.
That's the reason I asked.
Yeah, Phil and I were both.
I Googled it, and it took me to an XTC album. So
yes. And in fact, when we're done with the interview, I'll have to go to another hard drive. I've got a bunch of the Drums and Wires stuff.
Okay.
And it's really quirky, and most of it's not in 4/4, fusion with a rock edge and vocals, kind of King Crimson with a lot more distortion pedals. Anyway, I'm really proud of the band, and that band really put me on the map locally as far as like a certain level of ability.
Yes.
And in fact, that's the gig that got me the gig at Godz, got me the gig with Bo Diddley, got me a lot of the bigger gigs that I got later. Because those guys in those bands they would come see us play. And like Mark Chatfield came to see that band. And the reason he told me he hired me for the Godz is he's like, I knew if you could play that stuff, you could play anything I needed you to play in the Godz.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was from a technical point of view, he knew I could cover the gig after he saw me in that band. Because I knew he knew I had the sensibility to play it straight when you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Which is, that's one of the things that so many drummers today never figure out. If
you learn all those Rush licks, you learn all those Neil Peart licks.
Yeah, not
every drum group needs an offbeat cowbell.
Exactly.
Flourish.
Yeah, if you're the joy of the Rolling Stones is to play that stripped down, beautiful groove that he plays.
Yeah.
So if you're going to play a Stone song, learn all the nuances of what Charlie Watts does.
Yeah.
Because you're going to learn a lot more by restraining yourself and just thinking about the groove, nothing but the groove. It's all about the groove. And if you can get into that mindset with Charlie Watts and also to a certain extent, guys like Ringo, who's probably one of my all-time favorites, just there's a certain thing to be learned from playing material that needs you to be restrained and play the right thing at the right time. And there's a lot to be learned from let it go. Just, toss the feather.
Cut the rope.
Yeah, but you got to know which gig calls for it. And that's the thing that a lot of guys just don't seem to have the ability to learn. I had a kid walk up to me at a gig and ask me a question, almost exactly what you just said. I was in a band that played a lot of straightforward Black Crows and that kind of stuff. And the kid had heard I had a rep or something. And he thought when he showed up at that gig, he was going to see me like rip off a bunch of licks, and
Billy Cobham with the Black Crows type band.
Yeah. Can you imagine how awful that would be? And so I tried to, he's like, man, dude, I heard you're like the guy. And first of all, I'm not the guy. I told him that right out of the gate. In Columbus, it's real easy to be humble, let me tell you. But I just tried to say, it's like, dude, I was playing a Black Crow song. I'm not going to try to squeeze a Neil Peart lick and, or whatever it is you were looking for. It's like, that's the first sign of a crappy, selfish player.
Yeah. Agreed.
You know what I mean? If it's your solo and you want to let it rip, man, let it rip. That's when you're supposed to. But if you're playing, a song that goes straight up the middle, then you got to play what's straight up the middle.
Yes.
It's
a little thing we call taste.
Taste and the word I always used when I was teaching was appropriate. If you're in a funk band, play funk licks. Go learn some funk licks. Learn what is considered the right genre of tools for that world.
Yeah.
Also, you suddenly jump into a pool of stuff you've never played before. Wow, look at all the cool crap I can use on my next time I'm playing with Scott Gorsuch, or the next time I'm playing on a country album. Yeah, that stuff will pop up. Suddenly you're in the middle of a session doing something, and it's like, oh man, this just needs a little Cajun spice, and suddenly you found the magic answer to the once again the musical problem that you're trying to solve.
Yes.
And I think with drummers, it's one of the hardest things because they want to hear, they want to hear, look at him go, or how fast can you play your double kick?
Yes.
And I think
I always love the ones that said, who's the best drummer in the world? And they only define the best drummer by who's the fastest.
Right. And in fact, now when I am asked that very question, I have to ask them, is your criteria sheer technical ability, or is your criteria involve taste buds? Because who's the best drummer from a technical point of view is usually not the guy I want to listen to. So it just works out that way. I tell friends of mine all the time, it's like one of the best players in the world, and you might edit this out later, but you look at a guy like Yngwie Malmsteen who can just do amazing things on the guitar, can't write a song to save his life.
Or he writes the same song over and over again.
Well, name his big hit.
Yeah.
Shred Monster 7.
Yes.
Frank Zappa had a term for
something at Icarus.
Yeah, I mean, and it's amazing. Don't get me wrong. From a technical point of view,
with you.
Yeah,
he's written the same song since 1984.
Yeah, Frank Zappa had a term for guys that did that kind of stuff, and he called it clouds of educated gnat notes. And you're right. I mean, Mees. You listen to a lot of the guitar solos post Eddie Van Halen, like when the first time you hear that guy do it, it's like, wow, that's astounding. Yeah. But then all the copycat and they learned all the technique and stripped it of all of its soul and all of its intent and purpose in life. And my goal during my 16-bar solo during my Big Hair song is to just lay out as many notes as I can spray at the audience. Whether or not any of those notes specifically mean anything doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think a lot gets lost in the shuffle with that. And I think that rock and roll has a way of keep bringing it back. The Big Hair guys built it up, and then Nirvana comes and just like, write songs people want to hear.
Yeah.
It's like, it really comes down to that.
And if he's done a guitar solo, it is something you can sing.
Yes, and once again, it's within a song that people want to hear.
Yes,
I think what happened with a lot of the hair bands in the 80s is that, and this is an example of music in general, is that something happens at the beginning that's really cool and new and awesome, and then all the other guys like barnacles start encrusting to it, and by the time the thing finally sinks to the bottom of the ocean, it's because it just became full of itself. I mean, if you go back and look at some of the second tier bands, in the hair era, and I use this as an example just because most people remember it. The second tier bands, the writing was so awful, you know, and just so banal and devoid of any musical intent. It was just like crank out this, you know, Firehouse had a great record. Let's do Bang Tango, and let's put, you know, and it was like a big, like, it just like a
assembly
factory.
line widgets.
Yeah, they all had the same hairdo. They all had lipstick and pooched out their lips and just like stuff that I didn't like about music anyway. The idea that you got to market yourself like that in order.
Then you had this bands like Extreme
who could play their asses off,
and they could write their asses off. And
yes, like
everybody
Betancourt still has a career.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Paul Geary, the drummer of that, it sounds like everything that he did on the latest, the album, what was it, Three Sides to Every Story.
Yeah.
Could be done with a bass, drum, and hi-hat.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it was completely pocket, and it was completely suitable, and it's like it was completely well thought out.
Yeah.
And it was completely missed because it was came out the same year as Nirvana.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure there's a bunch of records that came out that year that just got eclipsed by the tsunami that came through. You know? I love the story Janny Lane talks about when he walked into his record company's office, and he used to walk in and there's always be like a picture of like a hair dude. And then he came in and there was a picture of one of the grunge guys, and he just realized, wow,
we've been replaced that quickly.
Then change like overnight, you know, that quickly. And that's in that world. You know, there's the funny thing about that world for me is that I've always had a hard time embracing the really extreme fashions that you seem to have to go through to be in a successful pop or rock band. It always strikes me as weird. I'm not anti, and I'm not that old curmudgeon who thinks it's all bad or anything. It's just, I'm fascinated by the fact, like, Aretha Franklin wouldn't get arrested today because she wouldn't look good in an oiled up bikini.
Or Bob Dylan, if you used American Idol criteria, Bob Dylan couldn't.
He wouldn't have even made it past the first audition.
Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of, and that's always been in music. I mean, back in the 60s, you had Yummy, 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 I've got love in my tummy. I mean, there's always been a certain portion of the pop music industry that's just awful.
Mm-hmm.
But the pie has gotten so much bigger that, and with the internet, now we're subject, every guy that has Pro Tools and a laptop has a band. And so people are forced to wade through a lot more mediocre, not so good just stuff offerings to get to the really good nuggets. The thing I always, when I'm talking to people, I always say, you know, when I grew up on the same radio channel, you would hear Frank Zappa and the Valley Girls, and then you'd hear Tom Petty, and then you'd hear Rush, and then you'd hear Black Sabbath, and then you'd hear Thin Lizzy, and then you'd hear, you know, Kenny Loggins. You know what I mean? All on the same radio station. So you were
Loggins and Messina.
Yeah, and you'd be offered this diverse platter of interesting everything from fusion kind of stuff to right down the middle pop music. And now the radio stations are very narrow in their focus. You know, we do new metal between 95 and 99. And if you listen to the songs that they tend to repeat a lot, it's just that if you're going to things that, you know, is not so good for the music.
You know, the one of the things that is, people aren't listening to radio much anymore because of that.
Yeah, I think radio.
So many more choices. If I can listen to anything to get the best music that I want, people that I'm seeing I'm every day. Music is my life. Every day, people bring me music I never heard. It's back
awesome.
In 1989. That was not the case.
No.
If I had, because I teach, if I had 15 students, 10 of them wanted to learn that Poison ballad.
Yeah. Right.
So,
you know,
it was a smaller world or a larger world. I'm not.
Well, you know, I don't know how old you are, but when I was growing up, I never liked the underground music because the lo-fi and all that kind of stuff never really appealed to me. I understand why it appealed to some folks, but it was never my bag of stuff. Most of the stuff I liked on the radio, I liked. A lot of it I liked. I got it. But nowadays I find that I'm the exact opposite. All the music that I like is considered kind of more underground, and the stuff that's commercially on the radio, it's like, I don't want to hear that.
Well, it's
the
reprocessed. Again, it's cookie cutter.
well, and as
They
many
found
as
it.
much as-
They found a
oh yeah,
they
well
found a
that had
template that works. It's like they're marketing soap or something. It's like,
well, that's like a whole corporate. Let's talk about how bad corporations have been for media in general. But in the record biz, now, yeah, they have that. There's so little money coming into the record business as a whole that yeah. Anyway, God, it's a whole conversation we could get sidetracked on about.
Yes, that will be part 2.
Yeah, because there's like all of the business side of it, because I do a lot of recordings. I do a lot of different, I'm involved in little ways in the recording industry just with these little records that I do, and you keep track of how they sell and blah, blah, blah. And it's not like it used to be. It used to be they'd sign you for 5, like REO Speedwagon's first hit was on their 5th record.
Yeah.
Nowadays there's so little money. If you don't get
They didn't get it, but nowadays, if they didn't get it by their second record, they get
for the first single. If that one doesn't catch, you're just done. Like, see ya.
Yeah.
It's just it's a lot tougher for anybody who wants to be a star.
There is no development.
There's no money for it now. There's just no. They would rather you do all of that. In fact, when I was in Razor Bliss, we were offered a deal where we had to pay to play. It's like, wait a minute, you want to be, you contacted
pretty
us.
common.
Well, we caught the very first wave of it, but now that's the way the business is done. And so wait a minute. So you're going to wait for the band to write and record, and with the quality of studios, like in this town, there's 2 or 3 studios you can go to. And if you spend a week in there, you're going to come out with a pretty good sounding record. Some of the guys that do this now on a smaller level really know what they're doing. So what the labels are smart enough to do with the advent of computers and Pro Tools and stuff, a lot of people can make some pretty good sounding records. So now the labels just wait till your record's done, packaged, blah, blah, blah. And when they contacted us, our second record had come out and had a couple of songs that were pretty good. And
who is this?
This is Razor Bliss.
Okay.
And so on the second record, the picture on the front is a baby bottle with pills falling out of it. Anyway, they got a hold of us. They called me and they found our number online or whatever, and they offered me like this deal that was a joke. And having been involved with labels years before to a certain degree, it was just like, what you want to do? What you want to stamp they literally wanted to take the record as it sat, put their logo on it, charge us $1,500, and then they offered us what is now the norm, is called the 360 deal, where they're now your management. They get a portion of your merch, they get a portion of your ticket sales, they still get most of your record sales, and offer you basically almost nothing in return. So it's just kind of like, wow.
Why would you need a record label to do that?
What's that?
And these days, why would you need a record label for that?
Especially since downloads are kind of like,
anybody can put up a download page.
Exactly. Yeah. The only thing you need now is publishing, and you need that guy who knows the arm to twist to get you on the Conan O'Brien show, or the manager who knows what arm to twist to get you the opening slot on the next Foo Fighters tour.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. You still need really good management, but
yeah. So how did you meet the Godz?
Yeah. It's just so anyway, I don't know how I got it. Sorry.
How did you meet the Godz? How'd you get your start with the Godz?
Okay. Mark Chatfield approached me. I was still working my day job. This is 90, beginning of 91. I had done a gig with Bo Diddley, and one of the guitar players on the gig was the original guitar player from the Godz, a fellow named Mark Chatfield. Mm-hmm. And Mark and I got along personality wise as well as musically. So anyway, I played with him on that gig, and then a couple months later, it was April. The Godz got contacted by the San Antonio radio station in San Antonio. Eric and Mark hadn't played together for a couple years, and they had sold more records than San Antonio was their biggest market period during the heyday back in the late 70s of the original lineup of the Godz. Mm-hmm. So they got contacted by the big radio station and the actual DJ who kind of broke them in Texas, and said, hey, we do this big thing for Cinco de Mayo every year. It's called La Semana Alegre. It's Happy Week. And all week long in the main town square, they put up this giant stage. I mean, there were 20,000 people there. And, you know, we flew in, it was airplanes and limousines and all that. And it was, you know, for me, it was the first time for any of it. And, but Mark contacted me after the Bo Diddley gig. I joined the band on a Tuesday, rehearsed Tuesday and Wednesday, and played the gig Thursday night.
All right. Trial by fire.
Yeah, it was really scary. And, because, you know, some of those songs is got to keep it running. And a couple of the other songs, those arrangements are pretty, the live arrangements are pretty, it's not that any of the chops were pushing me. It was just, you got to learn all the songs, you know, the live arrangement, the 12-minute version with all the stops and starts. And, you know, there's a lot of cues from Eric and that stuff. And so, yeah, so that's how I got the job in the Godz, was actually kind of sprung out of my gig, my first job with Bo Diddley.
Okay.
And so Mark had played with me on that gig.
What was your day job?
I was running the kitchen at a Ground Round restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was your last real job?
That was my last real job. Left it in 91.
And then you quit that for Bo Diddley?
I quit that for the Godz. Actually, the company was getting ready to shut down a few of the stores in Columbus. I had been through a divorce. There was like 3 or 4 things that the Cosmos was saying, if you ever want to jettison the day job, this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
So I took the leap.
Yeah.
And you know, 31 years later, I'm happy as a clam that I did.
You, me both.
Yeah. I just, that life, the whole corporate mentality, just, there were just anyway, that's a whole, but I was glad to get out of there. And you know, Mark and I then ended up playing a lot, besides the Godz. Mark and I had a band with Ronald Cole called Daddy Longlegs, and we had a really big drawing cover band here in town for years called Lovehead.
Who's the band that, like, okay, Ricky Soga?
Yeah, that was
Ronald
yeah,
Cole?
that was Daddy Longlegs. Is your thing working? I have on my office wall. That is the promo shot for that band. You'll see Soga on the right.
All right.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
And that's Mark Chatfield, second from left, and me all the way on the left in my funky bad haircut. Yeah. So that was Daddy Longlegs. And that was just a project that I did with Mark.
Yeah.
And so Mark and I, like, we played together in the Blitz band. We got along musically very well.
Yeah.
We ended up doing 4 or 5 projects together over the years.
That's wonderful.
And we're still buddies online.
Everything I hear about Mark is everything I hear about it is good, which is saying something, because I know I have people that I have haters.
We all do. And, you know, there are Mark haters, and I think it more comes from envy.
Okay.
Just because, you know, I got to tell you, Mark taught me, he was one of the seminal figures in my young musical learning course, because he would show up every single night and put on the big show. And it didn't matter if there were 10 people there or 1,000 people there or what. He was going to play, and he expected you to play at your best. I mean, he would give you serious shit if you dropped the ball. And because he didn't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah.
You know, and I've taken that on board completely. Mark taught me professionalism more so than any musician I've worked with in my life. He taught, because he plays every night like it's the last night he's going to be on stage. Yeah. And that, to me, and not only is just a killer and Mark is completely self-taught, and he has one of the best natural grooves of any guitar player. And he'll tell you, he's a great lead player, but he'll tell you, man, I love playing rhythm guitar. And there were some of my favorite memories with Mark is when we'd be playing at a gig, no matter where. And if it was a song he really enjoyed, he loved coming back on the drum riser and kind of hunkering down with the drummer. And, like, you know, he really liked being in rhythm land. He's a great rhythm player. He's a pocket player all the way. Great pocket. And because I have a decent pocket and it's my goal in life, Mark and I just saw eye to eye. Yeah. And always did, because the groove, it's got to rock. It's got to groove. It's got to be, you know. So, and professionalism, dress for the gig, show up on time, you know, Mark.
They had a dress code?
Mark was all that, you know, and several bags of. Well, you know, with the Godz, just you can't show up in your dad's white walking shoes. And
Okay.
you know, I'm amazed at guys who take promo shots these days and don't bother to put on decent clothes. It's like, you know, like you see a lot of bands where it's like, it looks like you just got off work at the tire place. And like, you know, like you got your dad's beat up old New Balance shoes on and you know, so you put on sunglasses and it's just, Mark was never that guy, man. He still, and Ricky Sogo's the same way, very stylish. To this day, Ricky Sogo's got a great haircut, always wears good, you know, there's, I should have learned that a little more. That, you know, that was one of the things that I could only take that so far. I always showed up looking professional, but I wasn't going to be the guy that's going to have the hair that touches the ceiling and is bright neon lights in it. It's just not my style.
Yeah.
So, and I think that worked against me on a couple of auditions, just to be honest with you.
Say that again.
And I'm a kind of a big guy, you know, I'm a big man. I'm a large person. I'm physically, you know, I mean, I don't mean like muscular. I mean, I'm a big round dude. And so that can work against you. And I laughingly, like, there's a lot of buddies who will tell you there's a lot of gigs where I will just laugh and go, man, I wish they'd quit hiring me because of my looks, you know, just laughing because I'm not the guy that ever gets a job because of the way he looks. But
we have I'm not even going to mention names. There's a band that has done that the same to me. It's like I am what I am, but it's like I don't look like I have a cocaine problem.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So
it's an interesting thing. Some guys don't take that so seriously anymore. Some guys are still.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this particular artist was still back in the 80s.
You know, for me, it's you know, if you're playing in a band, well, and even now, if you're playing in a band that demands that, then you got to go along with the program, you know.
Yeah.
If it's part of the thing, then you got to be part of the, you know. Sometimes though, I do look at bands and just like, man, I don't think I could go that far with it. That's just who I am.
Yeah. So how was Eric Moore?
Oh, we were fighting friends. I'm going to use his own term to describe Eric. Learned a lot from Eric. Certainly had a lot of fun. Eric tended to be very self-destructive as a person. And I think that he was one of those guys that was kind of trapped by his own persona. And what I mean is that because of my little bit of anonymity, when I was off the road with the Godz, I had all these other gigs I could do. But Eric never had those offers come because it was going to be Eric Moore. It wasn't going to be the bass player at the gig. It was going to be, you know, Eric Moore, and he was never able to shed that skin.
The Flintstones featuring Eric Moore were special.
That's what was going to happen no matter what he did, and he got roped into that a couple times by various bands here in town, where he would try to just be a member of a band, and it would turn into, you know, featuring Eric Moore, or you know, they would expect him to carry all the weight in the, you know, he's like, I just want to be the bass player. So a lot of them never actually got past rehearsals, but he was always talking to me about it on the way into town. Like, we'd be coming into town from doing some nights on the road, and he'd be like, hey man, I'd love to be, you know, I'd love to have some of those jobs that you have when we're not traveling, you know, doing all the side projects with Lovehead and all the other stuff that I've always done. And I always kind of felt bad for Eric on that one because he was never able to really do that. He was also kind of lazy when it came to some of the general business of being in a band. If you were in the band with Eric, he wasn't going to be humping his own gear ever. So you just had to take that as part of the thing. And after a while, that gets a little thin. Yeah. You know, that gets hard for guys
I put up with that too.
Sure. And, you know, and I'm not trying to poo-poo Eric because he's a much bigger name than I'll ever be. I mean, you know, he was interviewed by Playboy and everybody else back in the day. So, you know, I was glad to have the gig, but Eric was, you know, Eric and I shared a love of history. So in that respect, he was always very fun to travel with because him and I could have chats about Napoleon and stuff because I'm a big history nerd. And always have been. I've read since I was a kid. So him and I could have those conversations because he knew a lot more about history than Joe Average Guy. He had some really funny isms. It was our guitar player who replaced Mark Chatfield, a guy named Eric Mock, who's also a great guitar player in his own right.
What's his
He
name?
had the best description. M-A-U-K, Eric Mock, M-A-U-K.
Okay.
He played rhythm on the God's Greatest Hits live album that Mark came back to be on. They did a reunion, but Bob Hill didn't want to do it, so Mock played on that. So he's actually on one of the official God's recordings, and he's just a great player. And he was a quirky dude, but he had an interesting twist with words. And he said being in a band with Eric Moore was like being in a band with Yosemite Sam. We called him the Yosemite Sam of rock and roll because he was the bloodthirstiest, shoot 'em firstiest, lead singer in rock and roll. And so in that respect, it had its moments. Some of my funniest road stories are being in the middle of nowhere with Eric and just the craziest.
Yeah, I remember
the personalities involved.
That story about the story about Gene Simmons saying, "Aren't you that guy who used to like to do a lot of drugs?"
Oh, that's probably maybe I wasn't there for that, or maybe I didn't catch that.
That was Ricky Soga. I think Ricky Soga said,
"Yeah,
aren't you the guy that did a lot of drugs?" It's like that in the 70s.
Well, for instance,
for him it must have been a lot of drugs because everybody did drugs in the 70s.
Oh yeah. And well, Eric,
but he stood out.
That didn't really slow down until probably a few weeks before his death. I mean, it probably slowed down when he was old. I left the band in '98, so what he did after that, I didn't really keep in touch with. But yeah, he, the band had a bit of a rep, and sometimes that worked for us, sometimes that worked against us.
But they played every town, and they traded every town.
But yeah, he was
New York City. They would hit all the little hamlets in Ohio.
We were the Van Halen of Roseville, Ohio. We would show. I remember showing up at some of these plays, and I didn't mind that, honestly.
Yeah.
Working folks, man.
And he does have a work. You talk about work ethic.
Well, yeah. I mean, for those guys, it's like yeah, we probably were the biggest band that had ever been in a lot of those towns.
Yes.
As far as actually having records out and actually like being a for real thing. And the joy is the whole time I was in the band, man, that band was tight as a drum. We would open up for national acts and they'd come out and watch you play. It's like, wow, okay, that's the real thing. That's tight as a drum. And then, like, for instance, I remember a real quirky moment with D.D. Snyder, the guy from whatever that, We're Not Gonna Take It. D. Snyder from, yeah. He had a band called Widowmaker.
Yeah.
After Twisted Sister in the 90s, like so many of those guys were looking for a way to make a buck and tour and make records. So he had this project called Widowmaker. Pretty good band. I think Petrucci was playing guitar, the old guy.
Yep, Al.
Yeah. So anyway, we did some opening dates with those guys, and I remember him talking to somebody backstage, and I overheard him saying he swiped his whole shtick from Eric Moore when he would see Eric Moore play in LA in the late 70s. He saw Eric play with the Godz way back when and was like, wow. And you would hear, if you listen to D. Snyder's yakety yak on stage, there's a lot of Eric Moore niblets in there. And like, I'm not saying he swiped it. I'm just saying he had some influence.
We all borrow.
Yeah.
Some of us steal.
We all do. None of us are making this up. Yeah. After the jazz guys of the 20s got done playing the drums, it had all been played. Yeah. Whatever you're doing, you're just reconfiguring something that's already been done, Yeah. But yeah, Eric was a blast. That was a lot of fun. I got to meet a lot of my idols. The joy of the Godz was they were just big enough that most major promoters knew who they were, and they were just small enough that they could get us for a price that wasn't ginormous, and we could still make a buck doing it. So we got put on the front end of a lot of these little package shows, and we'd be on the front end of a show with like Vixen and Dawkins or stuff like that. So I got we opened up for Nazareth and just everybody, and so I got to meet a lot of my heroes, which was really neat. And it was another one of those lessons of, well, sometimes they're really nice, and sometimes the ones you think are going to be an idiot turn out to be really nice, and sometimes what do you think it's going to be turns out to be an idiot. So, you know, rock and roll is just like the normal world. You know, you just, you never know what you're going to get to. You shake a guy's hand and say hi, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember meeting Ace Frehley in Shreveport, Louisiana. His band had played there the night before. I don't know if it was Frehley's Comet or if it was just Ace solo or whatever it was, but he had played in the same club the night before, and the club owner owned the hotel next door, and he had a day off, and Eric and him used to be label mates when Eric was back in Casablanca.
Casablanca, yep.
So he came over to say hi, and I'm sitting in the office getting paid. I was doing the business for the band at the time, and anyway, so he walks in the office, and I got to meet, you know, that was kind of neat.
That's my ground zero, by the way.
What's that, Ace?
Ace Frehley.
Sure. Well, come on, dude. That guy had. How many guitar players did you know that wanted to make their guitar smoke? You know, I mean,
I was at the right age to accept that.
Yeah, exactly.
1978, I was 10 years old. They were superheroes. They're more, they rock guitars, superheroes, spitting blood, breathing fire.
Yep. Oh yeah. Come on,
guitars.
I mean, at one point,
tapped 6 months before Eddie Van Halen's Gets Alive 2. Ace tapped before Eddie Van Halen did.
Yeah,
on record.
Yeah.
He probably learned it from Van Halen though, because I know the Van Halen brothers played on the Love Gun demos.
I didn't know that.
Yep. So it's
so wow.
Bo Diddley.
What a great guy. What a neat dude. I got to play with him a bunch of times, and he first of all, that was one of the gigs that got me out of the day job, because the very first time I played with Bo, I was still working the day job. And that was another one of those moments where it's like, you know, if I'm good enough to play with this guy, maybe I'm good enough to. But anyway, I got the call work one day. A buddy of mine helped run America Studios, Gary Strauss. He passed away a couple years ago. Good drummer in his own right. Knew I was the right guy for the job, and their management was putting together the local band to back up Bo. So I was lucky enough to get that job. And Bo was supposed to show up and do a sound check where we are going to learn all the live endings to the songs, and he never showed. So my very first time with Bo, I literally walked on stage with him in front of a sold out, 1,500 people at the Agora, or the Newport, I guess it was called at that point. Yeah, in my own hometown. I mean, everybody that knew me was there. I was nervous as hell, but it was joyous. It was absolutely joyous. And I remember one thing he said, and it's another one of those things where it's like, I'm going to steal that and just put that in my vernacular book. Yeah. When I asked him, I said, give me some tips. And he told me, when you play the Bo Diddley beat, you got to accent the don't with your bass drum. I'm like, okay. Most guys play it straight and do the little Bo Diddley beat over the top of a straight 4 bass drum. Okay, and it drove him crazy, because that's not what's on the record. Anyway, so I played what's on the record. I guess it made him happy. But I remember we're walking on stage, and I asked him, literally like right before we went on, can you give me any advice? He goes, yeah, play the music, not the drums.
That's wonderful advice.
It is. It really is. That's because
advice.
I've used it in lessons with my students ever since, because it really was another version of don't overplay, shut up, stay in your lane, play what the song calls for. Yeah. And I'm the kind of guy that this was one of my first, like, wow, really big moments. I went out and bought every record he'd had out. So I learned all the grooves right off the records. And I think most of the guys who sit in with guys like Bo don't do that. I think they kind of do.
I would just like to play the Bo Diddley beat. I'm a drum fan. I'm a drummer.
Yeah.
Not your drummer, not your kind of drummer. You're a lifer. I'm a drummer. In other words,
hey, dude.
Drums are fun.
Yeah, we share that same thing.
Life.
They're awesome,
yeah. Dude. Getting that Bo Diddley beat though, that is
it's not that hard. Once you figure out there's a guy online that'll teach it to you faster than anybody.
Talking about the guy that takes the sticks and
no, it's a famous drummer named Zorro.
Okay.
He played on a bunch of hits. He played behind Paula Abdul and Bobby Brown and all those kind of guys back in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. And if you just punch in Zorro history of R&B drumming on YouTube, you have 50 lessons. And he talks about how those old guys were jazz guys. You have to play really light. But anyway, I wish I'd had that back in 1991 when I first got the gig with Bo Diddley, because it would have saved me a lot of time. But yeah, so that was absolutely joyous. Bo was the nicest guy. He told some great stories, and along the way, I got to play with him a couple times in Columbus and a few other gigs outside of Columbus. And he was super down to earth guy. He had learned his own lessons. For instance, Bo would not walk on stage till he'd been paid in full, in cash, up front before the show, because he had
like a Chuck
so many-
Berry kind of deal.
It's exactly the same thing, because back in the Chess Records days and stuff, those guys had gotten screwed so many times.
Put your gun on the table. It's like, we're going to get paid whether we're
Well,
it's like
and the
Old
guy that
West.
we called him as Tyrone. He had a right-hand man.
Yeah,
Bo Diddley drove all over the country back then in a Chevy Impala, and then he
like,
would rent
like Chuck Berry.
and then he would rent a limo in every town, so he'd show up at the gig in a limo.
Yeah,
And then at the end of the gig, he'd throw that square guitar case in the back of the trunk of the Impala, and him and his buddy drive off. And
3 blocks away and get back into their car.
yeah, exactly. And oh no, the limo would be gone after he arrived. At the end of the show, it was the Impala, because nobody was around. By the time Bo Diddley left the theater, everybody had gone home, so there was no show to put on. I ain't going to spend the money. He had that old school kind of, So yeah, he
Chuck
just
was
was
the
not.
same way.
Yeah, he told me
Did Bo pay you?
we always worked for the promoters. Yeah,
Bo
Bo
you did get paid though.
Oh yeah.
All right, because
Yeah, business wise, that was always straight up. No problems there.
Okay, because Chuck didn't always pay his band members.
Yeah, and yeah, I'd heard that about Chuck, but with Bo, it was never an option because we always worked for the promoters. We never worked for Bo himself.
Yeah.
Like he got his $3,500 in cash, boom, put it in he had a fanny pack, boop, and he would put the money in his fanny pack. And then he would walk on stage with the fanny pack.
Yeah.
Put the guitar on and do his thing.
Yeah.
And because that money's gonna stay with him, man.
Yeah. Well,
but how can you blame him, dude? He told me how badly he'd been ripped off by Chess Records and stuff, years later, they went back and did audits. And of course, by the time they got the audits that showed how much money he was owed, the guys who owed him the money were all dead. And, it's just one of those like, wow. And so, and he also kind of felt like he'd been left out of, they always say that Little Richard and Chuck Berry were the first guys who did rock and roll, but he had a record that came out a year before Little Richard or Chuck Berry's first record with a song called Roadrunner.
Okay.
And it's the first rock and roll song in his opinion and in mine. And he always felt like he got left out of the conversation. People obviously remember Bo Diddley, but he's like,
they remember the Bo. I don't know. People like myself, the Bo Diddley beat.
Well, and if you're hip to George Thorogood's first 3 hits were all Bo Diddley songs.
Yeah.
Bad to the Bone is one of Bo's biggest songs. And
Who Do You Love?
Who Do You Love and I'm a Man. Those were all
Bo
Diddley songs. And
Bo Diddley was in George Thorogood videos.
Oh, absolutely. George knew where he got it from because he probably had to pay royalties to use the songs. And I'm thinking Bo was smart enough to go, hey man, this is going to mean people are going to know my songs and I'll make a buck. So yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
He was smart, he was always, but he was just, the thing I loved about Bo is he was just so down to earth. Like when you would sit and talk to him, I have photographs in one of my old photo albums of my daughter playing catch with Bo Diddley at a gig. Like after sound check, we had to sound check by a certain time at one of these venues. And then there was this alley next to the venue and the doors were open. It was like summertime gig and we had some time to kill and Bo was just outside and somebody had a ball. And anyway, I got a picture of my daughter tossing the ball of Bo Diddley and that's kind of cool. He was just that down to earth. He was a super nice guy.
That's wonderful.
He's one of those heroes that I got to meet who turned out to be.
I love that when that happens because it's not always that way.
No. Sometimes you meet your hero and it's like, wow, that guy was an idiot, And
Last question.
Okay.
You're a world traveler.
Oh, love to travel. God,
Tell me about Egypt.
One of the most amazing places I've ever been, man. It's the culture there, if you read about it, the culture, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx goes back to 2,500, 3,000 BC. Second oldest culture as we think of culture, civilization. Just to to go through there. And one of the guys I traveled with was an archaeologist on some of the digs at the temples that we went to. So he was really, he was the guide for the little tour group I was with, but his name was Muhammad Rakabi, and I'm still in touch with him. He still lives in Cairo. And, but he taught school in New Jersey for a while. So his English was excellent. But he was from Egypt originally. And, but that is an amazing thing. I mean, it's if you're a history nerd, I don't know how deep into this you want me to get, but it just it's been one of the most amazing trips I've ever been on. The
artwork, I was thinking about
you
in front of the Sphinx.
Oh yeah,
you in front of
the Great Pyramid. And I was one of the lucky ones that day who got to go in the Great Pyramid. They let 150 people a day in.
Okay.
And you have to walk stooped over all the way till you get to the main burial chamber. And that's the one spot you can stand up in the thing. Okay. But yeah, just to be able to go in it and, you know, understand that the hieroglyphs that you see that are shallow, that used to get scraped off. If you see there's super deep ones, that's Ramses II, because he was going to make sure nobody was getting rid of his history. Because there was a lot of the pharaohs would come through and it's like, oh, I didn't like that pharaoh. Let's scrub them from history. So that's one of the reasons they keep finding discoveries with all the mummies, because, you know, the guys would go out of the way. Like there was a queen, Hatshepsut, Queen Hatshepsut. She was one of the few female pharaohs, but she was a big heavy duty ruler. One of the biggest temples you see when you're there is the temple of Hatshepsut. And they tried to get rid of her from history, man. They tried to scratch her out everywhere. Yeah. And so it's just fascinating that, you know, all these 4,000 years later, our politics hasn't changed that much.
Yep. Reinventing what actually happened.
Well, and like one of the things I get from travel, one of the big things I get from travel, and I try to tell this to folks who have an open mind. A lot of folks don't want to hear it. The people in all these countries, I've been to, I think every continent on the planet. I've been to Tibet. I've been to India. I've been to Vietnam, Cambodia. I've been to the Ukraine, Turkey. When you go through almost every country in Europe, when you go through these places, when you meet the people, you figure out very quickly that people all over the world are exactly the same. They're just trying to raise their family. They're just trying to get their kids an education. They're just trying to get some housing that is worthwhile and eat food that isn't poison. And you quickly learn that all the differences are mainly the governments, the folks. You know, I got to have lunch with this lady in China, and she lived in one of the old sections of Beijing. And she missed the old communist era because everybody was more together. It was kind of us versus them. Like our family lived in this courtyard, you know, like all of her sons and daughters lived in these apartments and stuff. Well, now the first thing every kid wants to do is get the education to move to the big city and get the fancy car and all that in China. And, you know, because they're trying to be more like us, actually. But sadly, that's the part of that community is what she feels like she's missing from her days under like she was like 80 when I met her. So she had grown up under Mao Zedong and what you think of as classical era Chinese communism. And not like today's communism. It's kind of like capitalism with authoritarian leaders. Same thing in Vietnam. They're capitalists now. They just hold on to power. It's not about socialism anymore. It's just about holding on to power. But that, once again, getting to the point I'm making is that all those people are just trying to do the same thing you and I are trying to do in life. You know, if you have a family, you're just trying to raise your kids in the healthiest atmosphere you can and try to arm them with common sense and some knowledge and send them out into the world and hope they do okay, you know. And when you meet the people in any country you go to, that I think if more people traveled, most people obviously don't have the means. It's kind of an expensive hobby, but I wish that like when I was growing up, I never understood why they did student exchanges and stuff. You know, I had a kid from Thailand who lived across the street for a year. And when you're 14, you're just like, kid from Thailand, you know, I didn't look down on it, but I was kind of like, why do they do that? You know, what? Okay. And then when I got older, I'm like, oh man, I wish they had done that so much more, you know. Because one of the things I found that when you meet people, I still have buddies from India that I stay in touch with. I have friends in England and friends in Canada and friends in Australia that I've traveled with, and we still stay in touch. I still email a girl in Nuremberg, Germany once a month. We just have a little email flurry. and I met her a couple of years ago in Norway. And you quickly find out that we all have the same goals in life, and it's the
that kind of
governments that make it, that pit us at odds.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
trying to be political. I'm just saying,
no, no, yeah.
Yeah,
I
know this. This
we're all
talk mainly
basically
about
the
drones.
same. It's like even though we all have our stories, certainly.
Sure.
But around the world, I envy you in that way.
Oh, I'm
all those experiences because that can teach me a lot about the context of my own life.
Yeah, and well, you're an open-minded enough fella that you would get it. There is a percentage of the population that'll go overseas and it just bounces off. But I think most people, if they're open-minded enough to want to buy the plane ticket to France, I'm hoping that they'll be open-minded enough. Like, you get all those caricatures. Like, I've had 100 friends ask me, because I've been to France once before and I'm going again in September. I just went, the last time I was there, I just spent 5 days in Paris and soaked up everything in Paris, Versailles and the Louvre and the Seine and the Notre Dame and Eiffel, all that stuff. But now I'm going to do the whole country. Yeah. And I'm just going to do a big loop and see all the historical old towns and yada, yada. Anyway, I have friends of mine like, well, were all the waiters rude? Because there's that thing going around like, French people don't like Americans. I think most people who travel, if you exude an open mind and a upbeat character, you're going to get that right back. I think that people pick up very quickly. I think the waiters in Paris understand if you walk in and you're kind of a dick, you might get treated like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I think it's where
probably right, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm trying to say it in the nicest way I can possible, because I've met a few people when I travel that just makes me shake my head.
Yeah, people
from the States, because I always travel on English speaking tours. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of, that's where I meet a lot of Australians and Brits, and that's where I found out I love Australian people. I don't know why. They just have a zest for life that is amazing.
Americans,
they really do. And they find me interesting because I'm not. They have their idea of what the typical American is. Yeah, and it doesn't usually involve the word intelligent. And so when they find out I've actually got a brain, they're kind of like, "Oh,
who knew?
Who knew?" And so you kind of, I kind of think of myself a little bit as like almost an ambassador, because for a lot of these folks, this is the first American they've actually sat and had dinner with. Yeah. And I'm already working uphill because I'm a big fat guy. So I'm already falling into the idea that all Americans are lazy and fat. And so I gotta get him past that. And so when I get him into a conversation, it's like, oh, okay. He does have something to offer. And so I feel like sometimes I'm breaking down the walls that they might have had. Yeah. As well as that's not my purpose. Like, I don't sit down at dinner, but every now and then I'll find myself like, well, you guys might have, seen this story, but there's also this story,
Yeah. That's wonderful.
That, I could talk. That's another conversation. I could talk about.
We're going to have a round two sometime. This is too good to stop.
Yeah, if we ever get like launched on the history and travel thing, that's going to be like
that'll be round two, Matt.
Oh my God!
And we want to thank Merv and Mike Geezy for connecting us.
Yes, Mike Geezy got in touch with me. Yes.
Yeah, yep.
Thanks to those guys.
Merv, and as I said, I will be in Columbus in mid-July. And
so you might want to come to the show.
I will see you a show most certainly, I look forward to meeting you in real time, in real life.
Yeah, man, we'll have a drink and
this is cool.
Fab some more.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. From one drum nerd to a
absolutely, dude. Thanks for getting hold of me.
Yeah,
I'm sorry we didn't spend more time talking about music and
no.
Going off on my little
story. No, we got all the stuff. So
all the stuff.
Yeah. Cool, man. We got Bo Diddley, we got the Godz, we got your roots.
Yep.
We got the music business.
Yeah. And the one addendum, I know you're trying to sign off here, but the one thing that I hope that folks in Columbus realize how lucky they have it, because traveling as much as I have, not every city has the wealth of really talented musicians that they have here in Columbus.
Yes, I'm finding this out.
I mean, there are other cities who are as good. Don't get me wrong, but there's not a lot of cities that are better. As far as just the sheer quantity. I mean, like I said at the beginning of the interview, Columbus, if you live in Columbus as a player, it's really easy to be humble.
Yes, that's a good way to be.
Yeah, we're lucky.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will see you. Goodbye.
All right, thanks, man. Take care.
Absolutely. See you then,
Okay.
Matt. Bye.
You got it.